Today we have a very special briefing. Based upon what's happened over the course of the last 24 hours, we're looking at a very, very tense and a very, very fragile situation. And we needed someone who can really contextualize, give us insight into the situation. We want to thank Jonathan Schanzer. Jonathan, you've always been a friend to FIDF. You've been a friend to all of those participating. And to do it on very short notice like this, we can't thank you enough. Jonathan, I know your schedule is very busy, and we'd really like you to be able to start and give us your insights.
Sure. Thank you, Steve. Great to be with everybody. A special hello to everybody at FIDF. It's been a remarkable 24 to 48 hours when we just stopped to consider what has been going on. Yesterday I started looking at what looked to be surprising news that the U.S. was actually striking targets in Iraq, that they were preemptive strikes against Iran-backed militias, and I thought that was remarkable. Well, an hour or so later, we learn about this airstrike on Fuad Shukr, the one of the most senior members of the Hezbollah military command. He was taken out yesterday. That was a daring strike by Israel right in the heart of the neighborhood known as Dahia. This is the southern neighborhood of Beirut that is a Hezbollah stronghold. It was pinpoint intelligence. The Israelis obviously had tracked him successfully. We've learned just now that in addition to Fuad Shukr, that there was also a senior official, an advisor from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a representative of the Iranian regime that was also in that meeting. He was also killed. And so now the Iranians are even more furious with the Israelis, and we are now all concerned about what it might look like if there were to be an escalation on the northern border. We can talk about what that looks like, but suffice it to say, Hezbollah has a significantly larger arsenal of rockets and missiles and drones, more than Hamas has. We've not ever quite seen a war along the lines of what could break out on the north. And so Israelis, I think, of all political persuasions, are watching that border very carefully. Right now, we hear nothing. I know you're in Israel, Steve. We've heard nothing from Homefront Command, from the IDF. They have not changed their posture, which means so far so good. But we know that Iran would like to turn the tables on Israel. One of the reasons for that is, of course, the assassination that took place several hours after the one that took the life of Fuad Shukr, and this is, of course, the big one from yesterday. That was the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. The Israelis targeted him in his home in Iran. He had a pied-à-terre, I suppose you could call it, and the Israelis had tracked him. He was there for the inauguration of the Iranian president. There were also, Islamic Jihad leaders and Houthi leaders and other terrorist leaders that were there at the inauguration. And I suppose it was after the inauguration was over, he went home and the Israelis took him out. One of my sources suggests that it was a spike missile that may have done the job. And that is interesting because that would imply that it was not an airstrike, which I think everyone has walked around with the assumption over the last 12 to 18 hours that it was perhaps a loitering munition or a long-distance drone, or even a missile shot from a submarine, for example, from an Israeli submarine in the Persian Gulf or something like that. What we're potentially looking at is a Mossad agent or some kind of contractor on the ground in Iran that has carried this out. If that is the case, then I think the Israelis have gotten under the skin of the Iranians. Not only did they do this on Iranian turf, but they may have done it with operatives who were running around there scot-free. There, I'm sure, there's psychological warfare happening here where the Iranians are clearly fearful of what's going on. Now, just one last thing I'll just add is the Supreme Leader in the last hour or so has indicated that he is going to authorize a response to the killing of Haniyeh and I suppose also Fuad Shukr and this other IRGC operative that was based in Lebanon. We don't know exactly what that means, Of course, we know what happened the last time the Iranians responded. They fired, more than 300 missiles and drones into Israel. The vast majority of those were, of course, knocked down. But I must say, the Iranians are learning right now through the use of the proxies and what they've fired themselves to see where the holes are in Israel's multi-layered missile defense system. So in other words, you've got Iron Dome, you've got David Sling, you've got Arrow, the short, medium, and long-term missile defense systems. They've not been hermetic, but they've performed incredibly well over the last 9 months. It'll be interesting to see right now how the Iranians, if they try to fire at Israel, what that what that mixture of rockets, drones, where it comes from, which jurisdictions. But we need to remember here, this is now a multi-front war. Regardless of exactly what breaks out in Lebanon, we are looking at hostile actors in Iraq. There are hostile actors in Syria. There are hostile actors in Yemen. This is a significant moment of tension. We are at a crossroads, I think, in this war, where it has been primarily focused on Gaza and Hamas. I think we're about to pivot away from that. I would argue, by the way, that Hamas, after last night, after the killing of Mohammed Deif, it's not 100%, but it looks like it's 99% that the top military leader of Hamas has been killed. My sense is that Hamas is a spent force. They look weak. They only have about, I think, 2 recognizable leaders right now, Khalid Meshal and Yahya Sinwar. That's all that's left of the leadership after 9 months of war with Israel. Their fighters have thinned out. I think Gaza, we may be moving away from that, and we may be moving into a new phase of what I would call the 10-7 wars.
You have that sense that their fighters are tired. Their fighters don't have a chain of command. They're doing terrorist activities. They're getting into buildings, and they're snipers. It's not that they haven't stopped, but it's not done in any concerted effort. It's not done with large numbers. And it seems that at any time there's a gathering of large numbers is a function of Israeli intelligence, is a function of whether it's the view that they have, whether it's drones. Israel comes in very different than what we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, where our American soldiers were sitting ducks and were hit by the terrorists. Here it's sort of the opposite. The terrorists gather, Israel comes in and eliminates them. So
yeah. I think that's right, Steve. But I would actually add something else. A lot of people were warning that Israel, by going into Gaza in the first place, that it was about to, thrust its forces into some kind of an insurgency situation, that you would see thousands of Israeli soldiers, targeted and killed on the sands of Gaza. Of course, we know that nothing could be further than the truth here. I think there have been, about 300 or 350 IDF casualties. Each one of them, of course, horrific and terrible. And we feel for their families. We feel for the state of Israel and their loss. But all things equal, the disparity in losses on the battlefield, it's really remarkable what the Israeli military has been able to do. How they've been able to dominate the battlefield. All of this is, I think, very impressive. But when I look at what's happening right now, I actually look at the success of one thing primarily, and that is that Israel took control of the area known as the Philadelphia Corridor. This is the area along the border with the Sinai Peninsula, Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, and Gaza. Once the Israelis got in there, I began to see a change in the tide of this war. And I think that's because the Israelis have started to get a handle on the tunnels that exist below the ground at the Philadelphia region. These are tunnels that apparently have been operated by the Egyptians. We don't know whether it was the government or the military or the Sinai Bedouin. It's unclear. The Israelis have been uncharacteristically quiet about this. So has the United States. I think they're covering for the Sisi regime. But I think once they got control of Philadelphia, they cut off the supply lines of Hamas. And when your supply lines are cut, you're going to lose the war. That's happening as they're also outmatched by the IDF. It does not mean that Hamas won't pose a threat any longer. There still could be rockets. There still could be attacks. There's going to be soldiers lost on the battlefield. But I think the hard fighting may be done. And I think that last night's assassination of Khalid Meshal was kind of an exclamation point on that, right? It was a moment where I think Hamas had to realize that they're really getting shellacked inside Gaza, and now their leaders are getting targeted outside of Gaza. I do get a sense that this may be winding down there. But again, we could be seeing things heating up in other fronts, and that may have always been what Iran had planned to do.
And as you said, whether it's 150, 170, 180,000 rockets coming from Lebanon, not to mention, we're hearing that there's 30,000 Shia militia in Syria, and there are 30,000 Shia militia in Western Iraq. And these 30,000 in Western Iraq, they're looking to cross the Jordanian border and enter into Israel. It's a very serious situation.
Yeah, they would love to do it. Obviously, the Israelis, the Jordanians, the Saudis, I mean, I think the entire region is on high alert. Whether, there is full cooperation, I don't know, but it's interesting. CENTCOM, Central Command for the U.S. military, they are there. They're on the ground. They're working with these countries. It's actually the CENTCOM is kind of the glue that is holding together the military cooperation over there right now. And as I have some criticism of U.S. policy, I think it's important to remember that CENTCOM is doing the Lord's work there, making sure that the Jordanians and the Saudis and the Bahrainis and the Emiratis, that they're all on high alert, that they're coordinating together. But I will also just add, though, that what we watch out of Lebanon is it should be frightening to everybody. Those numbers of upwards of 200,000 rockets, that's part of it. But Hezbollah also has precision guided munitions in its arsenal. This will allow Hezbollah to target, sensitive infrastructure, whether it's water or electricity. Doesn't mean it's all going to get through, but they're going to try, and they're able to try to target things with real precision with these weapons. So we're watching that. We hear about underwater drones that Hezbollah has in its possession that have not been used before in any serious way. We've actually heard rumors of other kinds of unconventional weapons that have yet to be trotted out. There's a lot of unknowns here as Israel faces down Hezbollah. But I will say that I think there was a moment last night where I sort of took a deep breath and said, I'm glad this is happening. Not because you want to see an escalation, but because, in my view, the restraint that the United States has put on Israel, I think, has actually paradoxically pushed Iran to test Israel more and more. It's pushed Hezbollah to test Israel more and more. They believe that America has tied Israel's hands, that perhaps America's, slow rolling weapons deliveries, not supporting Israel's war objectives. And so they think that they can go ahead and test Israel further and push the limits of this war. It looked like Israel dropped the gloves last night. And the two attacks, within hours of each other, the pinpoint precision, the kind of just the lethal blows that were just delivered, I think there was a momentum shift. Now, the question is, can Israel keep that momentum going and keep the Iranian axis on their back foot? That's the question that I have, because up until now, it really did look like Israel was fighting Iran's war. It was more of a defensive response to Iranian aggression. And I'd like to see that change. It did look like it started to change last night, and that does seem like good news.
What are you hearing in terms of Syria? We're hearing rumors that maybe yes, maybe no. One of the major IRGC, in fact, the gentleman, I wouldn't call him a gentleman, but the terrorist who's responsible for aerospace, for attacks, in terms of he may have been behind what happened on April 14th with the attacks on Israel, the 350 ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, rockets, etc., that he may have been taken out in Syria. Is that a rumor?
It's a rumor. It's a rumor right now. We're seeing lots of different reports. We know that there was an explosion in the Damascus area earlier this morning. I saw the reports coming out in Hebrew at the time, citing, of course, foreign sources, as the Israeli media often does. But we have not been able to identify yet who the target of that attack was. We also know, by the way, that there have been additional explosions this afternoon in Baghdad, in that area as well. So it looks like there's a lot of ordnance exploding across the region right now. We don't know if it was U.S. We don't know if it was Israeli. We're still sort of trying to figure that out. Look, if this was General Hajizadeh, that's his name, he was one of the chief people involved in the missile corps that Iran has built over the years. He is also heavily involved in the precision guided munitions project. that I was just talking about as it relates to Hezbollah. This would be a significant targeting if Israel was responsible for this. I'm hopeful that we hear that there was more good news on that front. But again, I think the key here is that Israel needs to start using the intel that it's been collecting. This is the time to start taking out those top leaders and pushing Iran back onto its back foot, pushing all of those proxies. Again, the Houthis, the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, those thousands of fighters need to know that their leadership is in disarray, much in the same way that we see the disarray in Gaza. This needs to start to happen in other places. Otherwise, Israel cedes the advantage that it may have captured last night with some of those targeted strikes.
You know, it's a poor analogy, but they say, for instance, in sports, the best defense is a strong offense. In Israel, as you said, seem to be always in the defensive, always being held back. When Israel has a deterrence factor, then the enemies cannot just manipulate Israel.
Look, that's right. And yeah, we had to see something happen here. And look, a lot of people have given a free pass to Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister. Some people have been tough on him. I will say that, I think the war was going pretty well with Hamas until probably about February or March. That was when we began to hear from the U.S. that Israel shouldn't fight during Ramadan, and then after that there were concerns about humanitarian challenges and issues related to that, and there were political disagreements about what Israel's objectives would be. And I think for the last several months, in my view, the Israeli government has not made significant decisions on the battlefield. They've waited. They've been trying to be patient, but that's really not the way to win a war, right? Israel's doctrine is to win lightning fast wars and to not allow themselves to be pushed into a war of attrition. They have allowed that to happen. That is the mistake, I think, that has occurred. And so now Israel's goal, in my estimation, is to turn the tables on that, to make it clear that Iran cannot continue to wage this war of attrition by proxy, right? There's six terror proxy fronts plus Iran. Israel's fighting a war on 7 fronts right now. Israel needs to make it clear that there will be prices to pay in each one of the fronts that Iran is trying to stoke. And that is really, I think, the goal, that the psychological momentum needs to shift and Israel needs to turn the tables. Again, I think it started to happen last night, but they need to press the advantage. The Iranians need to feel like they are reeling, right? That they're losing senior leadership, that they're losing their partners in the proxy groups, that chaos is starting to seep into whatever their war plan might have been. That's how Israel gets out of this in one piece. It doesn't mean that Israel won't have to fight some tough battles, specifically in the north. That's going to, I think, it's not a foregone conclusion, but it certainly seems like we're inching in that direction. But I think Israel has the ability to destroy Hezbollah, but they need to also make sure that these other fronts also are pushed into a defensive posture.
What do you make of the fact that we've got these the naval destroyers now moving back into the Persian Gulf, into the Middle East by America, including the strike fleets that surround these destroyers? Is that happening in conjunction with Israel? Is that happening just because they had a chance to refuel and to rearm in Virginia? Now they're coming back to their regular place. What's your read on that?
Well, my read is that I think the Biden administration thought that they had everything under control by constraining and restraining Israel. They thought, okay, well, we're going to start slow rolling weapons and we're going to keep wagging our finger at the Israelis, and they're going to find themselves, maybe fighting, a low level battle in Gaza, and nothing else is going to happen as a result. Well, that plan did not bear out, right? Hezbollah has been firing rockets at Israel since October 8th. We've seen, obviously, a significant escalation on Saturday, on Shabbat, when we saw the murder of those 12 Druze children in Majd al-Shams, right? That was the moment. I think that was where we crossed the Rubicon, where the Israelis said, okay, that's it. We're not taking any more of this. We've already lost 100,000 citizens from the north. They've had to move further south to get away from Hezbollah rockets. Right? There's still areas around the Gaza envelope where people will not return to their homes, at least not yet. They had it, right? That was it. That was their breaking point. So they gave They gave the U.S. a few days to try to get Westerners out of Lebanon. That, I think, is what explains the pause. They may have also, I mean, obviously they wanted Netanyahu to come back from his trip here to Washington, and maybe Bibi wanted to, engage in some consultations with his top security officials. But now the gloves are off. Steve, I think that, this is now a moment that the U.S. recognizes. Right? We continue to hear from both President Biden and also Vice President Harris. They're talking about trying to contain a wider war. They're deeply concerned about that. So they're going back to the one thing that worked after 10/7. You got to remember, the Israelis actually, after 10/7, they wanted to go north. It was the Biden administration that convinced them to fight the war in Gaza instead. Now, ironically, where the Biden administration said, don't fight wars that you can't finish, and then wouldn't let them finish in Gaza anyway, right? Really restrained the Israelis, especially over the last several months. But, I think at this point, it may be past the point of containment. There are still some off-ramps. It's possible that for example, Hezbollah might say, well, we're willing to absorb this strike that they absorbed the other day, and they don't fight further. It's also possible that I don't think it's very likely, but that maybe a hostage deal is struck. And Hezbollah has vowed repeatedly that if a hostage deal is struck and Israel stops fighting in Gaza, well, they will stop shooting at Israel. So there are a couple of off-ramps that still exist. But really, right now, from all indications, the region is on a knife's edge. I think most observers believe that we're going to see an uptick in exchange of fire between Israel and Hezbollah. And as we know, these are two actors that don't typically fight in a restrained manner. There are those that I talk to in Lebanon. My contacts there are hopeful that somehow this could be really contained to southern Lebanon and northern Israel. But really, if you think about it, the idea that Hezbollah will fight in a way that honors a kind of a gentleman's agreement about, the limitation of the battlefield, that just doesn't sound like Hezbollah to me. This is an organization that was created to fight Israel. That's the only reason why this group exists. And right now, they are on the precipice of getting a chance to do that. I don't suspect they're going to come out of it in one piece, but it doesn't mean that it would be an easy war to fight.
We want to thank you, Jonathan, for your assessment, your analysis. And it's a very trying time, very challenging times. And like you said, this could break out into a full-out war. This could be sustained. It could be limited, but we really don't know. And again, the rhetoric is not always reflective of the reality. As you mentioned, the Supreme Ayatollah has had some vicious rhetoric over the last couple of hours, but that doesn't mean that's the facts on the ground.
That's right. Really, the question is whether Israel has potentially deterred Iran. I believe that it had not up until this time, I think in part because of U.S. policy, maybe primarily because of U.S. policy. I think it's important that Israel has shown that it is absolutely not fearful of the regime, that it's ready for this war, and that there will be damage done to the regime. If that message is received, it's quite possible that Iran will stand down. And this is, I think, what we should all be hoping for right now.
One last question. From your sources, the strike on those Jewish children playing soccer this past Shabbat, was that something that was targeted? Or was that they were shooting into the Golan Heights, not necessarily targeting, and it landed there? What are you hearing?
What I've heard is that Hezbollah had tried to hit a military base, and that the Falak 1 missile overshot. In other words, it flew over the intended target and kept going and hit the soccer field in an errant manner. Now, what's sort of amazing about all of that is, of course, when Israel makes mistakes on the battlefield, the amount of just, vitriol that we see directed at a democracy that is defending itself against terror groups. I mean, they are never able to live this down. It's brutal the way that Israel is treated when it makes mistakes on the battlefield. Think about the World Food Kitchen debacle, right? That one errant strike, and think about the drama that played out. we don't even see Vice President Harris coming out and and condemning what happened with Hezbollah. It's been crickets. It's been silence. The world seems to just not be up to the task of criticizing Hezbollah and punishing it. And this is, I think, really this has been one of the more frustrating parts of watching this war. I think we all feel that the hypocrisy just continues to grow here in the way that the coverage of this war has been, in the way that politicians from across the world, how they've engaged with this conflict. But yeah, Hezbollah made a mistake. They won't admit to having made the mistake. They're actually now just saying that they didn't do it in the first place. That is a patent lie. We know that. The Israelis have actually shown the forensics. We know exactly what happened, when it happened, what the variant of the rocket was. But it was a mistake. They should still have to pay a price for it.
Those poor families, just destroyed and devastated by this. Jonathan, thank you. Needless to say, it's a time of incredible anxiety and incredible trepidation. But you've stated already twice that what's crucial is, once again, now Israel has a deterrent. Israel is not acting like someone who's got its arms tied behind its back. And hopefully they'll continue to deter the evil in this world, Iran and its 7 proxies.
Let's hope so.
I want to wish everyone, it's going to be a tough few days, but wishing everyone a successful week. Thank you.